This is football. Let's start from the beginning. During the Han Dynasty in China, trying to make a military exercise, they created a ball game called Suju that grew in popularity vastly quickly into the upper rank classes. It was speculated that the Han Emperor himself, Wu Di, loved the sport, which later spread into other nations like Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. The popularity grew so big that professional Suju players appeared during the Song Dynasty, which is similar to modern-day football, where they moved to different cities for away games. They played in many different cities, specifically wealthy cities like Lince. The game was such a hit that specialized court was built for Suju matches called Chuchang. The game, now considered a sport, had rules established and improved massively during the Tang Dynasty. Many examples of this was when they replaced the feather-stuffed ball with a similar type of modern-day balls. An interesting fact that there was two different styles of Suju, Suchu and Baida. Suchu was more of an entertainment-wise for emperors' birthdays or during diplomatic events. A Suju match of this type would usually consist of 12 to 16 players on each two sides. Baida was more dominant during the Song Dynasty and had a lot of rules compared to modern-day football. An example of this is that they had a reduction system. If a player had kicked the ball far out, it would largely reduce your team's points. A bizarre rule was that if you had kicked the ball too low or turned at the wrong moment, it would have led to fewer points gained. These were completely different rules from what we see now today. In the 9th century, the game was played differently than how it was in China. It was considered either mob football or medieval football. Even so, it was played in some small villages located in England, Scotland, and France. The way it was played consisted of 2 or more neighboring towns, and there was an unlimited amount of players on each side. To win the game, it was fairly simple: to carry a ball to the end of the opponent's town. One thing so particular about this was that there was only one rule: murder and manslaughter were prohibited. For that, you can assume they were violent and aggressive towards one another. And that happened to be true. The game got progressively severe and dangerous that in 1314, they finally banned it in England by King Edward II. Afterwards, Scotland and France did the same, but they weren't very effective. 7 years later, in 1321, a match of medieval football was played. What was interesting about it was that a man named William de Spalding had to deal with the law over the said match because of an accidental incident. A friend of his, also named William, bumped into him and was wounded by a sheath knife that was on the cannon. The injury was so severe that he died within 6 days. Apparently, this wasn't the first to have happened during this time. So in 1363, football was banned once again by King Edward III. Going back to around 1100s, the earliest recorded history of football was documented. William Fitzstephen was traveling to London and noticed that many kids or young men would come outside to play a ball game and had made Thomas Becket write it down. Another documentation was when a monk wrote on his diary explaining how he saw people playing with a ball, and how as well many injuries happened due to getting pierced by a sheath knife. In the 17th century, the sport was being played in schools now, but each school had their own rules. Most took it with the utmost safety for the students, and referees and other similar rules were created, except for a school called Rugby School in Warwickshire, England. A game of football was being held on 1823. A man named Webb Ellis grabbed the ball and ran. This started its own history of football called rugby. Even with all these schools creating their own rules and interpretation of the game, it is still unknown who had the closest to modern day rules. Many believe the man Ebenezer Morley was the man who invented the game. It is to believe that he was the father of the Football Association. Many believe this because Morley made 13 of the original laws in the FA. He became a founder of Barnes Football Club in 1862. A year later, in 1863, he brought along 12 other clubs to create a competitive league. But during his time, on October 26, 1863, the Football Association was formed. When this event happened, it was named by the stadium itself, El Macananzo. During the 1950 World Cup, hosted by Brazil, it was heavily implied by the press and the fans that they would go all the way and win the tournament. Their confidence grew in their two matches, an impressive win against Sweden 7-1 and against Spain with a scoreline of 6-1. Now all that was left was the final against Uruguay. Many had believed Brazil had already won the World Cup days before it has even been played. For many believed this was Uruguay's performance in that particular World Cup wasn't as amazing as Brazil. A narrow win against Sweden 3-2 and a draw against Spain 2-2. But as Uruguay was preparing for their match against the unstoppable Brazil, they had formulated a strategy to be more defensive against Brazil's attack-minded plans. But a man named Varela gave an emotional speech and told everyone to not be afraid of the odds against them, and told them to play their usual game plan. A memorable quote was, "Muchachos, los de afuera son de palo, que comienza la función," which means, "Boys, those outside are made of wood. Let the show begin." In this match, Uruguay managed to defend excellently against the all-out attack by Brazil, and kept a clean sheet by the end of the first half. Unfortunately, 2 minutes into the second half, Brazil finally breached through Uruguay and scored a goal, making it 1-0 to the Brazilians. Varela still hadn't given up hope and continued to press on, and eventually Uruguay had scored an equalizer by the 67th minute, making it 1-1. Brazil knew just a draw would seal their win, and Uruguay, wanting to win, had to do the impossible and score again. 11 minutes left before the match ended, the impossible happened. Uruguay managed to score another goal by the 79th minute, making it 2-1, and Brazil was stunned and shocked by what they were witnessing. When the final whistle came, Uruguay, the underdogs, had won the World Cup. This story would have been a famous underdog story if it weren't for its tragic ending. So many Brazilians were shocked that people unfortunately committed suicide all around Brazil, and many attempts happened at the stadium itself, giving this story its name, El Macananzo.
Good evening. The game you're about to see is the most stupid, appalling, disgusting and disgraceful exhibition of football possibly in the history of the game. Chile versus Italy. This is the first time the two countries have met. We hope it will be the last. The national motto of Chile reads, "By reason or by force." Today, the Chileans were prepared to be reasonable. The Italians only used force. And the result was a disaster for the World Cup.
In 1962, during the World Cup, a match between Chile and Italy was about to be played. In the first 12 seconds into the match, a foul had already been committed, and then the first ejection was in the first 4 minutes. Giorgio Ferrini, an Italian player, refused to leave the field and was forced to leave after armed police officers arrived. After this, it proceeded to go downhill vastly quickly. Lionel Sanchez broke the nose of the Italian captain, Humberto Maschio. Later into the match, Sanchez continued his devious acts. He He received the ball and held it between his legs and sat on it. He later again punched another Italian player, Mario David. After the match, Kenneth Aston, the man refereeing the match, came up with the idea of penalizing a player by a caution card, which is known as the yellow card, and an ejection card, also known as the red card. He pushed the idea and was used in the 1970s World Cup final, and ever since then, every match used it. Interesting enough is the way he got the idea. He got it when he was driving by a traffic light and thought of the color lights. The Football War, or La Guerra de Fútbol, also known as the 100-Hour War. During June 1968, tensions between El Salvador and Honduras were rising. One of these factors were due to overpopulation in El Salvador. It was estimated that there were 3.7 million Salvadorians, but the nation had reached its capacity and the people knew. Many Salvadorians migrated to Honduras, and by 1969, 300,000 Salvadorians migrated to Honduras, which the nation did not like. To combat the issue, Honduras issued a new land reform law, which later caused many issues for the Salvadorians, and that was the beginning of the intense tensions between these nations. What was the tipping point for these nations were the football matches between the two countries. During the 1970 World Cup qualifier, the countries played each other in a two-legged match, which later ended in a Honduran victory by a 1-0 margin. This sparked a riot between the fans in the capital of Honduras. On June the 14th, 1969, the second match was played, and it was an El Salvadorian win, leading a 3-0 victory. This later caused yet another riot, but a more violent one at that. And in that same day, the war began. Near the end of the war, Honduras government called the OAS, the Organization of American States, fearing the El Salvador army would invade the capital. Both nations made an agreement with the OAS and called off the war by June 18th. But tensions between these countries never died down until decades after the war.
Germany's first corner. Plenty of height on it. It's gone through. Germany score! It's exactly what Brazil was dreading. Thomas Müller. Oh, what a night they're going to have. But they might have number 7 here now. They have got 7. It's hammered in. An absolutely terrific strike from Schürrle, who has his second in a matter of minutes. And this embarrassment for Brazil is more acute by the minute. He raises his arm, boos ring around the Stadio Mineirão in Belo Horizonte. The Brazilians sink to their knees.
On July 8th, 2014, the semi-final of the World Cup of that year was being played. Brazil was hosting this specific World Cup, and its fans had to witness its most humiliating and most horror defeat in history of both the World Cup and Brazil. A 7-1 loss at home soil in the Mineirão Stadium. The fans were in absolute disbelief as they watched their players walk off the field at full time. How did this happen? Overconfidence? Well, let's start with Brazil's lineup. Before the match against Germany, Brazil had played a match against Colombia that had made 2 of their most brilliant and star players to miss out on the match. Neymar Jr. was unfortunately suffering one of his biggest injuries. As he was about to receive the ball, he was hit behind in his lower back by Sinji in the 87th minute. It was a possible end-career injury because, as he stated in an interview, that he could be in a wheelchair from the injury. The other star player was Thiago Silva. He was the sole man carrying the defense, so once he was taken out of the picture, Brazil's defensive flaw emerged. The reason Silva wasn't present was due to a suspension he received in the earlier match against Colombia. After Brazil's corner kick, Colombia was beginning their counterattack, but Thiago Silva knew a way to prevent that happening, but also knew he could receive a yellow card, which he was already on. He took the chance anyway to prevent them from winning and got suspended. The man to replace him was Dante, but even with an experienced defender like him and the confidence from Thiago Silva that he would perform, Dante still couldn't replace Thiago Silva nor fill the defensive holes. Many speculate that even if Neymar or Silva were present in the match, they wouldn't have made much impact anyway. Germany's kept most possession, making Brazil's midfield creativity low, and with Germany's all-out attack force, Silva wouldn't have been able to prevent most or some goals. El Clásico is the name of a match between the two big Spanish clubs, Football Club Barcelona and Real Madrid Club Football. Their first match was back in May 13th of 1902, but during this time they still had not had any rivalry for one another, and you really couldn't call this the first El Clásico. They continued to play against each other in friendlies and sometimes cup competitions, but until La Liga was formed in 1928, that's when the rivalry started to spark. The two clubs immediately performed well in the league and would demolish any club they faced. And they later became the two biggest clubs in the league, although still this wasn't enough to create the rivalry we have now today. What made everyone so passionate for their team and created this rivalry was back during the Spanish Civil War. Barcelona and Real Madrid were no longer just teams to people, it was what they stand for. People who had the same political and cultural beliefs would get together for one of the two teams. This is what sparked the rivalry that we see now today. During its long, lengthy rivalry, many historical events happened on the field between these two clubs. You would think the two greatest players for the two clubs were Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi. You would be half correct. It's actually between Di Stefano and Lionel Messi that caused the biggest impact at their respective clubs. Ronaldo might have equaled Di Stefano goal count against Barcelona and have won 4 Champions Leagues, 3 Club World Cups, a UEFA Super Cup, 2 of La Liga titles, Copa del Rey's, and Spanish Super Cup for Real Madrid. Stefano had won 8 Spanish championships, 1 of the Spanish Cup, and 1 Intercontinental Cup, and 2 Latin Cups, and then 5 Champions Cup. A possible contributing factor for the success Stefano had was due to the fact he did not want to adapt his playstyle to European football. He continued to do what he did best and played all around the field instead of a role, which brought success quickly with a 2-goal contribution in a 5-0 victory against rivals Barcelona in 1953-1954 season, and later winning the league that same season. Later, Di Stefano and his Real Madrid would play against Pelé and his Los Santos team, with anticipating building. Pelé and Los Santos would face a rare 5-3 defeat against Real Madrid. That's how impactful he was that he was able to defeat Pelé and his Los Santos teams. Now onward to Lionel Messi.
Jordi Alba, Lionel Messi!
Messi has scored 26 goals against Real Madrid compared to Di Stefano 18 goals against Barcelona. As well, many knows Messi's accomplishments against Real Madrid, scoring a hat-trick against them when he was only 19, and scoring a last-minute goal to win the El Clásico during the 2016-2017 season. During his 17-year-long stay at Football Club Barcelona, he managed to win 10 La Liga titles, 4 Champions Leagues, 7 Copa del Reys, 8 Spanish Super Cups, and 3 Club World Cups, an impressive trophy cabinet to say the least. He was also a part of the times Barcelona humiliates Real Madrid, being a part of the 3-0 win, a 5-0 win, and a 6-2 win. Bayern Munich, or Bayern München, has dominated the Bundesliga for the past 57 years, winning 31 league titles, and has been consecutively winning the league 9 times, from 2012-2013 season till 2020-2021 season. As like everything in the world, it has a starting place. During the 1970s, Bayern started to perform exceptionally and slowly start dominating the league. Thanks to their golden pioneer era, they had not just one, not just two, but 3 of one of the football's greatest talents in the world. They had amazing talent for each part of the field. Beckenbauer, an attacking center back that could easily score headers and defend. Maier, a man between the posts. Their goalkeeper was one of the greatest goalkeepers, winning 3 German Footballer of the Year, compared to Beckenbauer's 2 and Muller's 2. And for the attacking part of the field, they had Muller, who had a record of 40 goals in a single season. That took 29 long years to be broken again by, ironically, Bayern Munich's player, Robert Lewandowski, scoring 41 to surpass the record. One of many factors behind Bayern's dominancy was their popularity. Since they started winning, they began to be a place of recognition for winning silverware. If you were a young German footballer and get scouted by a bunch of teams, you would consider your options, until you see Bayern had scouted you. Even if someone isn't a huge fan of them, they would still want to join them to have a chance of winning silverware as a footballer. Another key factor was the 50+1 rule that was established in 1999. It's meant to take away the influence of a rich owner taking over a club and making them a powerhouse by just their money alone. This rule changed the way clubs in the Bundesliga was run. Clubs would have members to dictate control of the club instead of one person. And since Bayern has become more popular with each following year, they become more of a powerhouse and more members join. In 2019, Bayern Munich had reached 290,000 members, concluding their dominancy. In 1988, a club was founded called Tohoku Electric Power Company Football Club, which was nicknamed Bromi Sendai. They later changed their name again into what it is today, Veholta Sendai. After joining the second division of Japanese football in 1999, they quickly were able to stabilize themselves and get promoted by 2002. Which unfortunately quickly brought them down to the second division once more in 2004. As the club was looking serious about being a competitive team and wanting to win trophies, they appointed Mategara Mori as manager in 2008. As his first time being a manager, he seemed promising, just finishing his career in 1995 and being 34 years old. That's usually a young age for managers to be. He quickly made an impact, and by 2010, they were promoted to the first division. As a new manager, just as he was quickly to get into the first division, he just as quickly faltered by just narrowly staying in the division and by sticking to 14th place. Many believed they would just get relegated the season afterwards, but they had no idea of what's to come. At 2:46 p.m. Japanese Standard Time, an event known as the Great East Japan Earthquake occurred. The magnitude of the earthquake was a 9.1, making it the most disruptive earthquake in Japan and being the fourth in the world. What made scenes even worse for the people was that the earthquake caused tsunamis to hit them. So not just the earthquakes, but tsunamis as well they had to be concerned about. Unfortunately, the people only had 8 to 10 minutes to evacuate, but even then, that was still not enough time. As evacuation sites were established, they would be destroyed by the unexpected tsunami. Even after the events has occurred 10 years later in 2021, official reports finally came out, and it was saddening to say the least. 19,747 deaths. 6,242 either severe or light injuries, and 2,556 people are still missing. So the reason this event connects to this club was the resilience and perseverance of the players and fans. The club used its stadium as a place for emergency supplies, and the players and staff tried their best to find ways to help the people who were affected by this tragic event. After this, the J-League was postponed for 6 weeks. Many believed this amount of time was still not enough for many clubs and people to heal and financially recover. Many fans still went to their first match after the traumatic event, and before the match, all the fans gathered together and sang their version of "Take Me Home, Country Roads" by John Denver. Kawasaki went 1-up by the 36th minute, but later in the match, a one-of-a-kind moment happened. Fans from both Valence and Kawasaki came together to chant "Psycho Sendai," and Sendai delivered, scoring the equalizer by the 72nd minute, and again scoring the winning goal by the 87th minute. After this match, Sendai later places 4th in that season, proving many wrong believing they would get relegated, and later placing 2nd, their best placement yet in the following season. Although it might have been a crushing 2nd place, being behind 1st by just 4 points. They might have lost their magic afterwards with many 11th to 14th places throughout 2013 to 2020. They were still persistent and optimistic as ever, by still having the fans backing and supporting the club and players.
Bring back that sound, the kind that makes you go wow. Bass hit you with the boom pow. I'm party rocking with that old school style, bumping that underground ever since I was a child. Fresh like a farmer's market.
Rene Huita, known as El Loco or the Man. He's an astounding goalkeeper, having 435 appearances and scoring 43 goals. Yes, a goalkeeper scoring 43 goals in his entire career as the last line of the defense. As well, Rene was the man to invent the famous save known as the scorpion kick. He was a sort of pioneer of the sweeper-keeper style, coming before Manuel Neuer, who was one of the best representation of a sweeper-keeper. He might have not been the goalkeeper to score the most goals, but he was by far the most entertaining one. Rene was renowned for his risk-taking dribbles and saves, as well coming out of his own box to either pressure a player to shoot quickly, or if he has the ball, to try and score a goal. After transferring away from his boyhood club, Millonarios, having only 16 appearances, he still managed 7 goals. When he moved to Atlético Nacional, it was his longest stay, staying for the club for 6 years, having 112 appearances and only scoring a single goal. That goal was in the Copa Libertadores against River Plate in 1995, to take his team 1-up in the match in the first leg. They advanced to the finals on penalties, but they unfortunately lost that year. But back in the 1989, Rene was able to lead his team to the semifinals and had a domination of a victory against Danabu, winning 6-0. As they proceeded to the finals, they went on to penalties and won their first ever Copa Libertadores in a 5-4 penalty shootout. He then later on won the Colombia Prima A twice with Atlético Nacional, as well won the Copa Interamericana with Colombia. He later retired in January 25, 2010.